Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
Good evening, everyone. I have somebody you've all been waiting to see again. It's been a little while, but he's back. There he is. Hey, Brendan.
Hey, Rick Walker, how are you doing today?
I am just fine. It's great to have you back. We have such an important show to share with everyone tonight. We have a couple of other important people to bring in just a moment. Carl Larson from Ukraine Defense Support is going to join us, and Kevin Michalitzi from Crimea will be here as well. And we are going to talk about Putin's peace proposal and the upcoming peace summit, which is taking place this weekend.
You know, something I'm absolutely looking forward to our discussion today. We have a lot of diverse opinions here, so this should be really interesting. And thanks for having me on. This is fantastic.
No, it's my privilege to have you here. It's great to have you back, good friend. And Brendan, tell people about the foreign interference subject matter that we'll touch on tonight as well before we get started.
Well, foreign interference, there's kind of a lot of things going on, and that I've been digging and poking around quite a bit into that. There's a lot of mistrust that we have in our government integrity in the country of Canada, and with the mistrust, it's a dividing thing. And you've said it on the show already that we cannot go into an election in this country without knowing who, what, when, where, and why all of this has happened. And whether that's going to be disclosed at this point, it's not looking very likely. There's very stiff penalties for people who are in the know of this subject matter, where if they were to reveal the details or be a whistleblower, it'd be 14 years in prison maximum. And for a country that about throws nobody in prison, that's quite heavy.
Okay. Well, those are the two top stories for tonight. We'll have other news as well, but we're going to bring in our guests on the other side of this, so stay with us. Big show ahead.
Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Okay, let's bring Carl in. Kevin is having some technical problems. Welcome back, Carl. Great to have you here tonight.
Hey, Rick, and hi, Brendan. Glad to be part of the show.
Yeah. Good day.
You guys are just meeting for the first time, and it's a good time to meet because we're going to be talking for the first time in a while about peace, or maybe possible peace. So I'm excited about that. There's Kevin now. Let's bring him in as well. And I think this is the first time you two guys have met face to face, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, glad to share the show with you, Kevin.
Hey, Carl. Good to see you.
Very nice to have you guys together on the program. So, where shall we begin? This is a very important discussion because we have two things going on. We have Putin's peace proposal and the peace summit that is happening as well. So, Kevin, let's start with you because I know you've been taking a very close look at what Mr. Putin had to offer. What can you just kind of go over what's in that offer for our audience?
Well, essentially, what Putin offered today was a peace plan that he said Russia is willing to sit down and negotiate on starting tomorrow if Ukraine wants to. And in that proposal, he said that if Ukraine would withdraw their troops from the full regions that have been incorporated into Russia, so Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, that once he saw those troops being pulled back, he would, stop shooting at Ukraine. And, an additional part of this proposal was that he would also require a guarantee that Ukraine would not become part of NATO. They would not be a nuclear state. So that was the proposal. And they also released a statement that there is no deadline for the proposal outlined by Putin. But the West should remember that the situation at the front's changing dynamically. And of course, they, threw out Zelensky's, as they're calling it, illegitimacy, which, they're really kind of twisting the fact that the Ukrainian constitution doesn't say that Zelensky gets to stay in power. But, federal law in Ukraine actually says that under martial law, no elections can be held for any federal office. So reality is he is legitimate as long as the Rada keeps, extending
Yes.
martial law.
Yes.
But Putin did say that the Zelensky's illegitimacy is not an obstacle to negotiations, as long as whoever conducts the negotiations, it's recorded and the results are recorded by legitimate representatives. So the United States, essentially.
Okay. Well, before
And,
we get into too much more analysis or depth on that, Carl, can you explain what's going on with this peace summit and why it's important, which is separate from what we're hearing about from Putin?
Sure. One, and I just want to say I largely agree with what Kevin just said. Both sides are staking out a maximalist position, and you see that from Zelensky's side at this Switzerland Peace Summit. So it's a pretty smart move of Zelensky to hold this peace summit. Whether or not it's smart for him to exclude Russia from the process is another question. And as I understand it, the intention of the Swiss hosts is that if they continue to host peace plans, that Russia would need to be included at some point, which I think most of the world would agree is a good idea. I mean, but you can see, like, Putin, it's a kind of a ridiculous list of demands. I mean, not only would Ukraine have to give up the two occupied oblasts of Donetsk and Lugansk, but they would have to give up two that are not occupied, Kherson and Zaporizhia. I mean, in addition, remove all sanctions, swear to never join NATO. I mean, all this laundry list of what Putin is demanding. So, and you could make a case that Zelensky's peace plan has some, let's say, aspirational elements to it, right? So both sides are going to have to negotiate. Everyone knows it. It's going to have to happen at some point. The question is whether it will be more along the Ukrainian lines or more along the Russian lines. At this point in the negotiations, if you look historically at negotiations between warring powers, in Korea, between North Korea and South Korea and the U.S. and Vietnam, and in other conflicts going back hundreds of years, the first few opening salvos, so to speak, are typically not really based in reality. They're both sides are staking out maximalist positions. So probably we'll get to something in the middle, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I think that it is a master piece of marketing that Zelensky has gotten many of the world's leaders to set up this peace summit in Switzerland. I can only help his cause, which his main goal right now is trying to keep Ukraine top of mind for the world, right? Because there's a lot of other stuff going on, Gaza and everything, presidential elections and all that. So if he can succeed, then that's a win for him.
I think we have 107 countries taking part in the peace summit.
Boy,
that's what I read someplace, but
I believe it.
I don't know if that's accurate or not. In any case, I guess what he's really trying to do is build a base of support from other countries so that as he moves forward. My take on it would be then he would go forward with a unified voice with a lot of clout behind him, not just going in as Ukraine, but with all of these other allied countries,
Right.
and not then he's not sitting at the table alone in a position of weakness.
I think that's his hope, but
Hmm.
a lot of these countries are actually sending ambassadors, lower level administrators. So, is it really giving him the clout he is looking for, or are a lot of these countries, well, we're going to participate, but our main leaders aren't actually going to support it. So, there's a lot of questionable things going on in there. I did want to say, Carl, that part of Kherson and Zaporozhye are actually occupied. So, they've pushed in up to the Dnieper. So they've got about, 35-40% of those regions, and they have officially said that they belong to Russia at this point. So,
well, it would be very unusual for a country in the middle of war to give up a lot of their territory that they control, right?
That they still hold, right?
Right.
I agree with you.
Go ahead, Brendan. I'm sorry,
ahead,
Kevin. I
Brendan.
didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, so you had mentioned something about Zelensky's peace plan, and that you said that it's very different from Putin's plan. I don't feel like it's as public as Putin's plan either. What you seem to know something about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what his plan is supposed to be.
You called me out, Brendan. I mean, I dug into Putin's plan. I found it, and it's not easy to find, as you can imagine. The mainstream media likes to bury these things, right? But I am actually looking at it right now. It's on TASS's website. I figured it'd be on RT, but I couldn't find it easily on RT, surprisingly. But it's on TASS.
Oh, I'm talking about Zelensky's plan. You had.
Yeah, I'm saying I have not actually read Zelensky's plan. So
So I don't think that Zelensky actually has like a plan that has been released at this point. That's what the Peace Summit is really about. It's so that they can come up with a plan, and as I say, then go into negotiations with Russia afterward. I think that's the way I'm reading what is supposed to be happening over the weekend.
He does have a 10-point peace plan, but to your point, it will probably change this weekend.
Yeah, I think his original plan was, Russia withdraw from all occupied territories, including Crimea. They rebuild the country. Putin is removed as the leader. So, kind of
the good old Treaty of Versailles.
A lot further out there than Putin's plan. But like Carl said, both sides have to kind of throw that big ball out there.
Well, let me help, because I have it right here. Here is Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. What is the 10-point peace plan? Radiation and nuclear safety. No one has the right to blackmail the world with radioactive disaster. Constantly endangering Ukrainian nuclear power plants.
Right.
So
that's a real just the bullet points. It's got it real short.
Right.
Yeah, and note the first thing he calls out on that nuclear thing is the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is actually held by Russia. So, unless we're going to believe that Russia is, shooting missiles at themselves at the power plant, that's one of those things I see falling out. Yeah.
Not anymore, but they did, and they control it, and they're using it for nuclear blackmail on the whole continent, right?
We'll agree to disagree on that one.
So energy security, food security.
I don't see anything about removing Putin. I do see them wanting a creation of a special tribunal to prosecute Russian war crimes, which would probably be a non-starter for Russia.
But of course they have passed the law saying that they will not negotiate with Putin. So, that has been stated several times that Putin cannot be the leader of Russia.
Oh, I was unaware of that. Interesting.
release of all prisoners and deportees.
Seems like a good idea for both sides, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say.
It's making reference here to 20,000 children. And in fact, I have an interview coming up within the next day or two, I think, with Ed Dixon, who works with a church group here in my area, Canadian. He's apparently they brought some 3,000 orphans from Ukraine over here to Canada, and they have support programs set up for them. So we're going to be talking to him. Just as a sidebar, withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities. So I guess he wants all the Russian troops withdrawn from all areas of Ukraine. Is what I'm taking that to mean.
Yeah, which includes Crimea. So
Yeah, so everyone knows Crimea is a special case. I mean, they will probably have to decide on something like a UN administered autonomous zone with some sort of referendum of inhabitants to decide the fate of Crimea. I mean, Crimea was traditional. A lot of people don't know Crimea was traditionally part of Russia. Actually, Khrushchev, who was Ukrainian, he gave it to Ukraine. And the people in Crimea have traditionally spoken Russian, not Ukrainian. It's primarily been Tartars until Stalin brought a whole bunch of Russians in. So it's a little different situation. If you look at it on the map, you think it's always been part of Ukraine, but actually not.
right, and that'll be a non-starter for Russia. So,
And it doesn't look like these demands are like they're both going to have to give up some of these concessions in order to reach a peace deal. Like it's not going to happen unless they like this is crazy. Oh, over 100,000 war crimes have been committed. It's war. Like things are crazy in war. They're not going to prosecute 100,000 war crimes. Like that's not going to happen. They didn't even do that in World War II. Not 100,000 of them.
Russia will demand prosecutions against Ukraine. So, I see that as a non-starter as well.
Depends on how hard we hit Russia. It depends. All this non-starter business, it's all dependent upon how well we support Ukraine to defend themselves. If they hit Russia enough, or Russia's economy collapses, then all cards are on the table. And on the other way around, if Ukraine's economy collapses, they're going to be much more open to, if Zelensky's killed in one of the many assassination attempts against him, which he could be killed at any point, or he could be bombed at any point as well, not just assassination, then things would change dramatically.
Media protection of the environment, these seem like issues that are not really major stumbling blocks to me.
That just sounds like he's trying to impress Justin Trudeau or something.
Yeah, maybe. Prevention of escalation. Ukraine is not a member of any alliances, and the Budapest Memorandum has not been able to ensure the country's safety in practice. Therefore, when the current Russian invasion is repelled, it is essential to prevent any chance of its repetition or further escalation. This can only be achieved with proper and effective security guarantees for Ukraine, as well as renewed post-war security architecture in the Euro-Atlantic space that will include Ukraine.
So I assume that NATO.
Yeah, so 9 and 10 are, you have to let us into the EU and NATO.
Right, and I see a path for them into the EU. NATO, I mean, I imagine you would feel, Kevin, that would be a non-starter. And frankly, I think it's a needless provocation for Russia. I think that if there is going to be peace, Ukraine probably shouldn't join NATO, or at least not for many years to come. If they get their land back, leaving aside the question of Crimea, then it doesn't seem like they would need NATO. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, they've already been accepted into NATO, and them no longer being in conflict with Russia would definitely bring that to fruition. I think, like almost immediately.
No, they're not accepted into NATO at this point.
No, they've never been accepted. So there's a entrance procedure that they've been accepted into, but that's a long ways from full NATO membership.
Right, and in fact, I think there have been comments made that they can't join NATO. They won't be accepted into NATO while the conflict is ongoing. Support of the peace plan. So these are all just kind of, I think we've kind of touched on the major points here.
Yeah, I found it interesting that although Putin today was saying that he doesn't care who is negotiating for Ukraine as long as it's guaranteed by somebody else, it's kind of counter to what he's been saying to date, which is, well, we can't negotiate with Zelensky because Zelensky passed a law saying they can't negotiate with us. So, that's kind of a softening of that position. And, we'd need to see some changes in Ukrainian legislation for some of this stuff to go forward. Really, Putin's proposal today, really was kind of a tactical move before the peace summit in Switzerland. It's really just Moscow demonstrating its readiness to suspend hostilities, but on their terms based on the current situation on the battlefield. And, unfortunately, at the moment, it's unfavorable for Ukraine, which is, suffering a lot of defeats right now, and its territory is systematically coming under the control of Russia.
What are your thoughts on that, Carl?
Well, it's true. Ukraine's on the back foot at the moment, and the question is, what difference will the American weapons make? And there's a lot of talk about F-16s and ATACMS. They've had Ukraine's had great success in the ocean there, in the Sea of Azov and in the Black Sea. So that's good. They're freed up actually shipping lanes to take out their grain, which is pretty impressive. But it is true, on the battlefield, their military has had to trade territory for lives, and nobody really knows what is the actual death rate. What are the casualty figures on either side? Both sides lie. What is it?
Yeah.
That famous axiom: the first casualty of war is the truth. Unfortunately, I'd love to say, my heart goes out. My heart goes out to the Ukrainian side. Obviously, look at the flag behind me. But they prevaricate just like any country that's at war. So we don't really know how many Ukrainian lives are being lost. The evidence is that in frontal assaults, the Russians lose about 2 to 3 times as many as the Ukrainians. That's been traditionally held to throughout human history in infantry wave assaults, meat grinder assaults. Of course, the Ukrainians lose civilians from behind the lines to suicide drones and to Shahed drones and to lots of other attacks. So there's casualties on the Ukrainian side that are not matched on the Russian side. So that might even things out a little bit. But it's good that they're losing territory.
No, I won't agree with the propaganda on that one, Carl. I'm living here. I go up into those regions. I see what the casualties are. Let's keep in mind, one of the things that Russia has done consistently, including in the Kharkiv area right now, is they give plenty of warning before they come in. The Ukrainians are actually evacuating civilians out of those areas. Russia makes sure that they're targeting actual military, targets. They aren't targeting civilians. Now, do civilians get hurt? Absolutely, on both sides.
I'm talking about soldiers, Kevin. I'm talking about places
No, don't cut me off. You brought up the civilian casualties. You brought up that Russia's losing a lot more soldiers than the Ukrainian side. You were saying 2 to 3 to 1, and then you brought up the civilians are being killed by loitering drones, things like that. We can say the same thing on both sides. Take a look at Belgorod. Now, Russia claims Ukraine is striking civilians and civilian targets, but realistically, there's military bases there. They're launching missiles from there. So we have cluster bombs that the United States provided to Ukraine that are being used, and lots of civilians are being killed there. I've been to that region. So they are striking civilian infrastructure directly from the Ukrainian side into the Russian side. And these are attacks. I've been there. So,
well, I've been to Ukraine, man. I've seen plenty of Russian attacks with my own eyes. I mean,
yeah. But
you can feel that way if you want.
Yeah. But, we'll disagree on the casualties. I'd say it's the opposite. It certainly isn't what a lot of these Western analysts are saying of 10 Ukrainians for every Russian. It's obviously not anywhere near that. But,
but I mean, it's a military truism, Kevin. I mean, if you've been in the military, like the defender has the advantage, and the Ukrainians are much more willing to trade territory for lives, whereas the Russians use meat grinder tactics. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. I'm not talking about civilians. You're leaving civilians off the table. I mean, the way that Russia has been able to take those towns is really by using positional warfare as opposed to maneuver warfare. So maneuver warfare is a fancy word for blitzkrieg tactics, and it's what I was taught as a U.S. Army soldier. It's what we used very successfully in the Gulf War, and before it in the Gulf War, and then after it in OIF in 2003, which I was a part of. Very fast armored combat supported by air power, and you flank the enemy and you cut off their supply and their logistics, and you pinch them off, and you win that way. Whereas positional warfare is a grind. It's just attacking front on, usually infantry, usually not vehicles. I mean, I've got a lot of material from the and the Ukrainian.
Yeah, the U.S. and NATO are good at using scorched earth tactics. Russia is not doing that. So, yes, they're absolutely obliterating Ukrainian towns when they come in and they take them, but they're fighting, house to house, street warfare, and a lot of these civilian targets that get hit are reality places where the Ukrainians are sitting up in top of apartment buildings and shooting and things like that. So if you remove all the propaganda from it,
I agree with you. Sorry, go ahead.
But the losses are not 3-1 in favor of Ukraine. I would say it's the opposite.
Well, agreed. Kidding, right? Okay. No, that's not true. So, I mean, it's a fact of warfare, man. The defense has the advantage. If you're in defense and you're willing to trade land for lives, you're going to lose less men than the enemy. I mean, this was just,
unless your defense doesn't have the weapons and ammunition to defend their territory, which is what the situation is. They have literally no air defense at this point. So
that's not true. Both sides actually have quite good air defense. That's why both sides keep getting air helicopters and airplanes shot down. And actually, they've gotten quite a bit more. The Germans have provided a lot of Patriot batteries. They just shot down a very expensive Russian plane, a stealth plane, the other day.
Well, and on a daily basis, Russia is shooting down, Ukrainian fighter jets. This is an unbalanced war when it comes to weapons and ammunitions at this point.
I don't really agree. So the Russians certainly have a lot more artillery, and they have more planes, and they have the advantage of they can glide bomb attack. So they use Su-25s and 27s within Russian territory to launch glide bombs and hit Kharkiv. And I by the way, I agree with you. I think that by and large most of the casualties that are horrific, where hundreds of or dozens of or hundreds of Ukrainian lives are lost, civilian lives are lost, primarily those were bombs that missed their target, or drones that were shot down and then they land on an apartment complex, or they were, just some misdirected attack. By and large, the Russians don't attack apartment complexes, not because they don't want to. If they had enough weapons, I bet they wouldn't mind, except they realize the propaganda value for the other side. But it's a function of attacking the enemy, who is naturally embedded within the civilian population. Same thing you see in Gaza. And then also, Russia does have a strategy of attacking Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. That much is pretty well proven. They've been doing that for a year and a half. They attack primarily electricity plants, and they've been very successful at that. They've pretty much denied Kharkiv power about a third of the time, and they're very effective. That's the same tactic they used in Syria to really bludgeon the civilian population into not supporting their enemies. So it works in Kharkiv. But I'm just talking about military, like the defensive tactics. I mean, it's I don't know. I'll try to find a source that you'd believe that the Russians lose a lot more lives than the Ukrainians in frontal meat grinder attacks. It just
I'm saying the Russians lose less than the Ukrainian in those attacks.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'll try to find a source that you'll believe, because I'm pretty convinced it's
you won't, just like I won't find a source that you'll believe. You know, we sit on opposite sides of the table here, and we're not going to agree on it, so there's no sense in debating it.
No, try me. Send me some links. I'd love to see your evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got first-person eyewitness accounts, but I will say those are primarily soldiers in the Ukrainian military, so they have a stake in the game. So, and maybe their perspective is a little slewed. I do have official Ministry of Defense material from the Ukrainian MOD, digging deep into Wagner Group tactics and the differences between those Wagner Group tactics and the Russian military tactics. And they said a primary difference is in the willingness of Wagner Group to sacrifice their troops. Wagner was very good. They divided their troops into 3 groups. They had an A, a B, and a C. And the A were convicts and people they didn't care about, basically. And those people oftentimes weren't even armed. They were given a shovel and they were sent up to dig.
The problem is you're taking the word of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. So if this is the data you want to show, then I'm going to throw the Russian Ministry of Defense at you, which is showing the exact same things. You know, Ukraine is currently, pulling convicts out of prison. They're putting them on the front lines. And, so you're accusing Russia of one thing that Ukraine itself is doing as well.
Well, but this document was for an internal audience. It's a secret document that was prepared for Ukrainian military commanders. So I would like to think it would be at least reasonably not fanciful for that audience. It wasn't aimed at Western news media.
Well, you would be surprised at what I have access to on the Russian side. So
how about finding an international news media that we could both agree on? Who would be somebody you would trust?
I'll give that to you.
How about Reuters?
I'm not gonna continue debating something we aren't going to agree on. It's
well,
kind of
maybe we could agree that this has been more of a stalemate in many respects, where we've heard a lot of the pundits out there say that this thing's going to be over in a matter of days or weeks or in a month, and 6 months, a year, 2 years later, we're still into this conflict, and now finally we're getting someplace with maybe peace on the table. But it seems to me, just looking at it from afar and trying to be sort of neutral about it, that it is a stalemate, and I don't think that Russia is is in a position. I don't think they're sitting as pretty as Putin would like us to believe, and at the same time, I think that Ukraine. Well, it's just what I said. I just don't think that. I think it's more of a stalemate than one side really winning over the other. It looks like there's ground that has been recently lost by Ukraine, but they're gaining a little bit back, and it's been a back and forth without a lot of major gains in many months, I think, on either side.
I'll agree with you on that, Rick. I mean, Russia for the last 3-4 months has been making advances, largely because Ukraine's, not had the defensive weapons that they've needed.
And that's
But
because we had the delay in the funding, which was tied to the border security and the Republicans, the MAGA
and of course,
Republicans, right?
the promises of all the NATO countries were going to send this, and then they don't, and
Mhm.
things like that. So,
So you delay the delivery of aid by 6 months, slow those deliveries down for 6 months. That has an impact, and I think we did see impact from that.
Oh yeah,
Fair.
Even if something is announced, it's still going to take months for something to happen. So if we say Canada declares we're going to send a bunch of armored vehicles to support Ukraine, well, how long is that going to take? I think we just finished manufacturing some that we promised to send over there like a long time ago. It takes time. Lots of
I mean,
time.
the stuff being promised right now, they're talking 2025, 2026. So, it really comes down to, can Ukraine hang on that long?
And Kevin, when you say that they're sending sort of second level or even third tier representatives to the peace summit, do you think maybe the G7 conference, which is kind of wrapping up, is a prelude to the peace summit for Zelensky? Because there he was at the G7, getting these long-term support agreements or assurances from Biden, Japan's, I think some other countries as well, to the tune of billions of dollars. Of course, that's an executive decision, which could be reversed if somebody else ends up in the White House. So I don't think that it's really an ironclad guarantee for support over 10 years because it can be changed at any time in the future. But it just seems to me like there was window dressing there, some theater, some PR, some substance to it, sending a message to Russia, but it mostly a prelude to what's coming up over the weekend. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the G7. I mean, they've already come out with their statements on this whole, Putin proposal that they will not support it. The allies need to increase arms supplies to Kiev. That was a statement by Lloyd Austin earlier today. They've confirmed that they're going to give 50 billion of, initially they said loans to Ukraine, and but the United States came and says no, it'll be grants. It won't have to be repaid. So even these G7 countries are throwing their support behind Ukraine. Like you say, it's all kind of window dressing. Is it going to be grants? Is it going to be loans? It's not realistic to expect Ukraine to be paying back any loans in the near term. Their GDP is so far in the toilet at this point.
What do you think of what we've seen at the G7 and what's coming up over the weekend, Carl?
So, so I have to be full disclosure, Rick. I have not been following the G7. I try to look at major currents and things that are going to actually win the war. And so I've only paid cursory attention to the the peace summit, and B, the G7, because I don't see it having a huge impact. And I do agree that a lot of the weapon systems that we're providing are more for bragging rights on our Western side than for actual battlefield impact. Don't get me started talking about F-16s and M1 Abrams tanks. I mean, they're just, I would love for us to sell them to an ally, sell them. I won't say Israel because I'll get in trouble, but whatever. Sell them to, I don't know. God, what's a good ally that we can trust? England or somebody. And then take that money and buy FPV drones and anti-drone electronic warfare jammers, and that would make a huge impact. And I've met with numerous members of Congress and said exactly that, and they tell me it's a little harder to change course than I might hope. And I do have to politely correct one thing you said, Rick. It's not the MAGA, the Make America Great movement in Congress is not anti-Ukraine. It was a very small portion. It's called the Freedom Caucus. Mm-hmm. And these folks, a lot of them are, I'm told, good-hearted, but Putin has identified that they are their districts are very susceptible to propaganda, and these people they're in very deep red, very conservative districts that are very susceptible to the America First, nothing else matters kind of message, and therefore you have these few members, especially Marjorie Taylor Greene and a few others, who kind of held the whole Congress hostage. Because I mean, when it passed with enormous numbers of pro-Trump Republican support. So I just want to make sure we don't throw the Trump wing of the Republican Party under the bus, because they've been very supportive.
Yeah, I need to be more careful with my words. So I appreciate that. You know, and you brought something up that's, I think, very important, and that is the PR game. An old friend of mine came over 2 days ago. I was speaking with him outside, and he just came right out and said, you know, I'm on Russia's side. And I thought, wow, you know, Canadian, we're in this conflict, and I get it. I hear it all the time. It just seems to me like Ukraine absolutely losing on the PR front. How significant do you guys think that is? Do you think it's important?
Well, but before we go down that path, I mean, you know, you guys were talking about, you know, Trump and the Democrats, and I see Brendan over here kind of biting his tongue, and he really looked like he had something to say.
I didn't have any such things. No. What I was really picking up on is definitely some propaganda stuff. Like there was a video with Joe Biden and Zelensky, and Joe Biden is looking pretty cool strutting next to Zelensky. So it's like he's definitely using it for PR. There is a big election coming up. Like, and this is putting Joe Biden in an election year front and center, right? Like, just take a look at this photo here. Like, look at that. Look at them. They're two bros.
May I bring that up on the screen for you?
Yeah, please. Oh, okay. Like, see, look at that. See? And
that's a professional shot, you can tell.
And this makes Joe Biden look good, especially because he doesn't have to say anything. It's like a picture that's worth 1,000 words.
A no malarkey zone. Wow.
A no malarkey zone. So I just remember it was very WWF-esque watching Zelensky. He's doing like this macho strut right next to Joe Biden. I think he had his aviators on. I was looking for that video. I can't seem to find it right now. It would have been a good one to pull, but very, very much like it's going to make Joe Biden look good to a lot of people who support Ukraine. A lot of people do support Ukraine.
Group, like focus group, came up with that. I'm sure it was scripted. I'm sure they planned it out.
It's all very planned out. Of course it is. Very much so.
I mean, I think PR is really important to this. It's a war, right? Just like the war being fought with guns and tanks and drones. But Kevin, you had a comment? I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I say this all the time. There's a lot of propaganda on both sides. And one of the things I hear over here a lot is, no, the Russians don't do propaganda. And, you know, to that, I'll call BS. So they're still in the 90s compared to, you know, what the West is using for Ukraine. But they've moved up 10 years in the last couple of years in their propaganda.
I don't know about that, Kevin, because over here, I have to tell you, they've gone from, you know, pretty heavy positive support for Ukraine at the very beginning of this to, I don't think very many people are supportive of Trudeau continuing to send money over to Ukraine at all now. And that's largely because, maybe it's just because, I think it's because Russia's way better at the PR game than you give them credit for. I think they're extremely effective.
Yeah, I think part of it's the propaganda, but I also think a good part of it is you got a lot of people in the West who are complaining about, you know, their wages versus the inflation, the cost of gas, the cost of food, you know, these things rising. So I think you have multiple things playing into that. I think where Russia is excelling at propaganda is things like this statement today. You know, like I say, this is a a pure statement to say, hey, you guys over there in this peace summit, we're willing to talk. And the world sees that. It goes across to the news, and people remember that. So, well, gee, we've got Zelensky passing laws saying he won't negotiate with Putin, and Putin's going, yeah, we'll negotiate. So I think things like this, I think what they use very effectively.
And I think Kevin has a bit of a point there with how clear and simple his terms are, whereas Zelensky's 10-point plan is kind of, it's very Treaty of Versailles his 10-point peace
Really?
plan. It's very messy.
I think it's pretty straightforward. 10 points. I was unaware, Kevin, that Zelensky passed that. I guess it was an executive order or something. It's not necessarily a law, but he's not going to negotiate with Russia as long as Putin's in power. And I disagree with that. I think that's terrible. It sends the wrong signal.
Yeah.
But I mean,
it was actually passed as federal law. The Rada actually confirmed that. So that's written into, of course, Ukraine is constantly changing their law and their constitution. And, this is nothing new for them. I've seen this going on, since the early 2000s. So
I don't see that about the Rada. I say it was a decree, but anyway, the fact is, this peace, these dueling peace plans, Ukraine's clearly winning in this regard. I mean, they had, how many did you say, Rick? 100, over 100.
I believe 107 countries attending.
I don't care if they're sending an ambassador or the president. The fact is they support it because they're sending someone. How many are supporting Putin's peace plan again? Can you remind me?
Well,
not so many.
Let's see. We had,
Belarus and Venezuela and Cuba?
Actually, I could answer that, actually, because the number one criticism about this peace summit is that the BRICS nations aren't attending. China is not attending because they said, because Putin is not attending, we're not attending either. And it's leaving a lot of it's leaving a lot of people to wonder, how much teeth does this even have? Because the people
I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. You know why it doesn't matter? Because it's not a peace negotiation. It's a peace summit where they're talking about peace to formulate or refine a peace plan, to build support, to build a coalition, to then take forward into an actual negotiation for peace.
Yeah. And I would say it's a much more effective PR exercise than Putin issuing a statement that's laughable. But getting back to Russian propaganda,
Carl, let me stop you there, Carl. So you're talking about all these countries going to this peace summit. And on the other hand, there were 148 countries at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum just last week. So
that's very different, would you say? That's apples and oranges, isn't it?
I think it's related because this is also about economic warfare. And Kevin, you messaged earlier today and pointed out, which something that a lot of people need to be aware of, is that the U.S. dollar is no longer being used for a number of things, including, I think, stock transactions between these BRICS nations now, right? Can you explain what that's about? What are you seeing over there?
Yeah, the Moscow Stock Exchange today has discontinued all trading in U.S. dollars and euros. So they are strictly trading in national currencies. This is a BRICS thing. And we're seeing word coming in that some of the other BRICS nations are doing the same thing. We had Saudi Arabia today let their petrodollar contract with the United States expire and are refusing to renew it. So the petrodollar doesn't exist for Saudi Arabia anymore.
Which other BRIC nation is not using American dollars besides Russia? I'd love to hear that.
I didn't say they weren't using it. I said the Moscow don't twist my words, Carl, or you and I will have a go around here.
I'm not twisting. I'm repeating what you said.
This was the issue I had with the last time you were on Rick's show. So I said the Moscow Stock Exchange is no longer trading in U.S. dollars and euros. And the word coming in is that some of the other BRICS nations are also talking about not trading in the euro and the US dollars. So,
Okay,
has
you
it
said
happened
something
yet?
different.
No. So don't
That
put
they
words
weren't
in my
doing that.
mouth.
But if they're talking about it, okay, I'm just repeating what you said, man. But that's fine. If
You
I'll
aren't
just
repeating
continue.
what I said, you're twisting what I said.
Well, we can record it if you like.
We have it recorded, actually.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I think that we're clarifying things and making sure that we all understand each other clearly, and I think that the larger point is that we have two sides, two groups of countries facing off with each other on an economic front. It's another front in the war. You've got an information warfare battlefront, you have the kinetic warfare, and you have the economic warfare. Am I missing
And-
anything? There's probably
And-
another
I'll
one.
believe that
Information.
when
You have
another
the
country besides Russia does it. When Russia does it, okay, they're going to do that. That's fine. If Brazil and China and others stop using the U.S. dollar for anything,
But, you know, I'm actually-
huge impact.
I'm watching the chat go by here, and I'm actually going to play off of what the chat's saying here as well, since Carl doesn't want me to actually bring forth this point that Saudi Arabia has killed the petrodollar today. They have refused to renew that contract. The petrodollar with Saudi Arabia is gone. That means the OPEC nations likely will not be trading in US dollars with anybody but the United States at this point. They're going to national currencies only. So that's a big problem for the United States.
And do you think that's related to Ukraine?
I think all of it is related. Like Rick says, we're talking propaganda, we're talking economic warfare, we're talking, warfare on many different fronts here.
Well, you're making this case, Kevin, that the BRIC nations are standing up against America because of our actions in Ukraine, and I just don't see the evidence. Sorry.
Well, the actions in Ukraine, the United States and Western Europe apply sanctions against Russia, and we have all these BRICS nations,
Right.
and we've got 40 some odd BRICS nations now or other nations wanting to join BRICS, because they know that the United States uses the US dollar as a reserve currency, as a weapon. And that's all sanctions is a weapon. If they,
Right.
They've been talking about applying sanctions to China. They're talking about applying sanctions to African countries that are either in BRICS or asking to join BRICS. So it's all related.
Sure. Well, there was 40 plus countries that stayed neutral during World War II and shamefully didn't take a side then either. And it's unfortunate for them. They have to bear the burden of history. But, fortunately, over 100 countries have agreed to attend this peace summit in Switzerland. And I think that's a real vote for which side they prefer. We'll see in the next few days how many countries come out and say, yeah, Putin's peace plan is what we think is fair, and we support that. I think you'll find it's a pretty small list.
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that front.
We'll have to wait and see.
I think, from my perspective, I think we're in a third world war. It's being fought on all of these fronts, and what's going on in Gaza is just part of it. And we have other wars going on around the world as well. It's not just those two, but
to your point, it makes it like a hot and cold war at the same time. We might go down in history. Might go down in history as like the fire and ice war. Like, really is what it is.
In fact, I've been arguing that the information war is maybe the most important front, because
I agree, it is.
You win the information war, you can undermine support for funding. You can turn the population against itself, against its own government, and we're seeing that. I'm seeing it in the chat right now.
Yeah.
Right? I listened to it in my driveway, talking to my friend 2 days ago. This is the result of information warfare. And on the economic front, if this is long-term warfare, you undermine the U.S. dollar. Kevin, I agree with you. you upend the petrodollar, you eliminate that requirement that oil be purchased with U.S. dollars
Yep.
in Saudi Arabia. You end that agreement, and everything gets upended. We're This is very serious, actually, because now you're going to have a decline in demand for U.S. dollars, huge internationally, and that will result in even more inflation, decline, because it's going to result in a decline of the dollar. It's basic economics. It results in less demand for the dollar. Therefore, you've got all these dollars out there. The U.S. will have to find a way to pull these dollars back in a pretty rapid fashion. Otherwise, you'll see a collapse in the value.
And what we see in the world with countries that don't use the American dollar, what we see with the world is the countries that don't use the American dollar legitimately will use it illegitimately, and the money laundering and money printing of U.S. dollars that takes place in North Korea, for example, is like astounding, and it's very dangerous.
Well, you undermine the economy, you can't finance a war.
Yeah.
So that's, in the longer term, and this is a signal from the BRICS nations to the West that this is no longer business as usual. This is now not just a multipolar geopolitical reality that is a new geopolitical reality that has come to pass. This is a multipolar economic reality that we're going to have to deal with. The United States, Western countries, no longer just able to, like you said, Kevin, impose sanctions and use that to get their way. Can't use it as a weapon anymore. I've said for a long time it's a mistake to do that because it undermines trust in the economic systems.
The other thing that undermines the trust is the fact that, they're talking about at the G7, this $50 billion grant is actually going to be backed by Russian assets that were seized. And, other countries are looking at this too, when are they going to start seizing our assets that are held in that reserve currency?
And my answer to that would be the next time a dictator is worried about having his assets seized because of invading his neighbor, I'm happy with him keeping his money and not putting it into American or European banks.
So you're saying you prefer Biden doesn't put money into an American bank?
Biden?
Found some web results. I can show them
You
if
shut,
you ask again.
yeah, you shut up, Siri. See, Siri's agreeing with me.
Serious.
Carl, the look on your face, and I'm not going to get into this with you, but I'm going to call you on it. You can call Putin a dictator. He's more democratically elected than the U.S. president is. And if you go down, from your last show with Rick, I still have the data that I pulled on that. If you take the official lists of what a dictator is defined as by organizations like the UN, even the United States government falls into the dictator category, even more so than Russia does. We have democratic elections here. You don't have to believe it if you don't want, but if you keep pulling the dictator thing, I'm going to beat you over the head with it.
Okay, you can feel that way if you want. You're out of touch with 90+% of Americans, and I'd say Canadians. So I don't really view that viewpoint as very mainstream. But
you're out of touch, and you're out of touch with 100% of Russians. So,
I have Russian American friends here.
When you start pulling the dictator blather, that's all it is. It's blather. It's propaganda. You're repeating the Western line. So
is Putin not a dictator?
Putin is not a dictator. No. Yeah, you're incorrect.
Am I out on a limb? Is that an unusual, like an unsubstantiated assertion?
Yes, it's unsubstantiated.
No,
just
Kevin,
like Xi is a dictator. Just like everybody in the United States doesn't like is a dictator.
Kevin,
and yes, I'll talk over you if I have to because you're full of crap.
Okay, before I step on a mine and blow myself up, I'll let you go, Brendan, and then I'll take the risk. So you go ahead. What do you think?
I was just saying that we're all gentlemen here, right? I know. Well, I mean, yeah, we're all gentlemen here. So let's. I know it's tough. Like, there's this is the whole of North America right now. Carl and Kevin are representation of what is going on in so much of the world right now. Like, this the symmetry and the
Well,
imagery
yeah.
here is perfect.
I'll step on the mine. I'll tell you what I really think.
What do you really think?
Please.
I think that we've got problems on both sides, to be quite frank. I think that we have a lack of trust and confidence in the electoral system in the United States and in Canada because of what's happened in the last few elections, not just with what's happened with Trump. You can go back and look at the hanging Chads issue out of Florida, several elections ago on the U.S. side. So the integrity of an electoral system is largely dependent, just like the economy, on public trust, and that has largely been undermined for a variety of reasons. Do I believe everything that Do I believe that the last election was run with real integrity? I think that there was some shenanigans that went on. Is Joe Biden legitimately the president? Yeah, I believe that he is. I think there were some strategies that were used that maybe weren't entirely ethical, but maybe legal. And I think he is the president. And in that regard, I think that we still do have a democracy. I sit here every night and I keep holding up the Constitution of Canada for our country, saying that we really do have a country and it's worth saving and fixing the problems with. On the Russian side, Kevin, I think you've actually said and admitted to me that there is an authoritarian element that comes with the government that you have in place right now. Not to say that it isn't democratic, but just like in the United States, and I think even to some degree in Canada, but less so, but just like in the US, Russia also has problems with manipulation over there of the process, where we saw Navalny imprisoned. A political opponent, the main political opponent to Putin, and that alone raises a lot of questions for people. So whether that's legitimate or not legitimate, it undermines some trust in the system there. And when I see any leader elected with 90+% of the voters voting in favor, I have to wonder if that's really a fair system, because that's pretty unusual. You only get to a place like that either it may have been legal, but it has to have been largely as well because of marketing, public relations, those kinds of things. And if you can win an election legally, but do it because you convince people that they should be voting a particular way in order. You see what I'm saying? So what's a dictator? A dictator, you might win an election technically legally, but manipulate things because you control the media. So I don't live there. I don't know. But when I see 90+%, it says to me that somebody's got their thumb on the scale. At least to some degree. That's pretty tough. I don't think I've ever seen an election over here at any level in government where anybody has ever won, except maybe at the municipal level, like 90+%. And I'll let you respond. Go ahead.
Well, 86%. So
Okay, there you go.
How many candidates?
You can keep me accurate, sure.
Do you guys want to know a fun fact? North Korea also has elections. Did you guys know that?
Right. So does China.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do lots of countries that, many of them have similar results. Some of them have, better results. Some of them have worse results. I've said that Russia has a heavy dose of authoritarianism in their government, but it is what was required after the collapse of the Soviet Union to get this country back on even footing, getting people to living, decent lives, improving their economy. So this is the kind of leader that Russians, Soviets have historically had, and what they needed. If they had come in like happened with Ukraine, and they said, well, gee, okay, we're going to do everything like the United States. We're going to be a democracy. And, that has failed miserably for Ukraine. And has for years. When I met my, Carl, don't even open your mouth yet, because I'm going to answer you before you even open your mouth. When I met my wife, Viktor Yushchenko was running for president. They had 3 elections because Western observers claimed that the first 2 were not, legal. There were problems, that there was this
So you'd recommend
interference by the
authoritarianism
West.
instead?
Let me finish. Even the chat is telling you that you have to learn to keep your mouth shut and listen to
No,
the chat.
sorry. When you spout propaganda, I'm going to interrupt, just like you do.
I'm not giving you propaganda. You aren't letting me tell an actual story. So this election occurred 3 times. And as what happened is, by the 3rd time, people were tired of voting and they quit voting. Ukrainian people at that time, in the late 90s, did not support who was elected president. And the general consensus in Ukraine, I was there, was that it was a Western pushed election of a Western backed president. So this is,
That's an argument for fixing the system, not retreating to authoritarianism like the Russians have.
Russia never retreated to authoritarianism. They
You're
had
Okay.
no, they had authoritarianism from day one, a certain amount of it, and it's what they needed, and is what Ukraine needed at the time. And this is what Ukrainians that went through the breakup of the Soviet Union will tell you, is that people did not need all of this freedom thrown at them. They did not know how to make those choices because they had been living under the Soviet Union for so long that they needed some authoritarianism to
Provide stability.
I've heard this
Right.
before. They had to have
And-
bread before they could vote.
To Kevin's point, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was lots of corruption occurring in Russia. And it does take somebody like Vladimir Putin to come in and say, well, I'm going to fill the power vacuum that's here, because otherwise it was the mob that had it.
Right.
You
Or the
guys know,
oligarchs.
do you guys know Bert Kreischer? You guys heard of the comedian? He tells a funny story. I am the machine. He drinks a lot of vodka with Russian mobsters. Well, anyway, this guy went to Russia. And the whole story is about how he gets in with the Russian mob on this college trip where they took a field trip there. And so the whole thing is that these people were fully in control of everything. And the college class had to bribe the Russian mob and have Russian mob attendees with them. And so it's a great story. I suggest you look at it. He's hilarious.
I've heard it. It's on YouTube.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what Russia was dealing with. And I think in a kind of a way that's also highlighted in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. What was that called? Red something? Kevin, you probably... Red Dawn? No, not Red Dawn.
Red Sonja? Or Red... Oh, God. I know the one. Shit.
I don't remember.
There's so many. Red Scarlet.
No, like there is an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where he plays a Russian cop. And the whole thing...
I know.
Yeah, I think it's Red.
Red Heat. Red Heat. Oh,
yes,
my God.
that's what it is, yeah. But that's just... There was so much corruption in the country after everything fell.
I've heard that as well. And you know what, Kevin? You're probably right. In the 90s, I've heard that none of the post-Soviet countries were really ready for unbridled capitalism and unbridled democracy. And the end result was a lot of mafias took power and a lot of oligarchs swooped in and scooped up billions of dollars. And the end result was you had, mass starvation for Russians and Ukrainians and, Latvians, Lithuanians and Kazakhs and everybody. And it was horrendous. So, of course, there was a power vacuum. Really, this is our fault. We did not institute a Marshall Plan for Eastern Europe like we did for Germany and Japan after World War II. We just left them to their own devices. And of course, they plummeted into a deep hole for a decade. And of course, people will vote for a dictator if their children are starving to death. Of course they're going to. And I've heard that Putin actually was a pretty benevolent president. He was officially elected. He was a properly elected, democratically elected, at least for the first few times. But I mean, we'll agree to disagree, Kevin. I'm just going to agree with the vast majority of political scientists, news media, and countries and people around the world who say that today he's a dictator. So,
well, we'll agree to disagree, because also we have a lot of those same guys saying that, U.S. government is an authoritarian government, and Biden fits those same, check marks for being a dictator. So, we have what's going on with Trump. You have to agree that all these charges against Trump are obviously not only twisted a bit by the media, but is, a witch hunt by the Biden administration. Are some of the charges correct? More than likely, yes. But are they charges that would have been taken out against other people and had them held accountable for them?
Aren't they throwing not Hunter Biden right now as we speak?
Well, yeah, but how is that negatively affecting Joe Biden right now?
I think it's really going to affect
not nearly as much as putting Trump out in front of the media saying, look, this guy is guilty and we're going to,
But that's because Joe Biden did not pay off a porn star. And Trump's so stupid. All he had to have done is paid with his own money instead of paying out of campaign funds. He paid out of his campaign funds. If he just paid out of his own money, he could have done that privately and it never would have gone anywhere. He took campaign finance funds. He does this. He shoots himself in the foot. It's so stupid. And if he just not done that and then had this complicated arrangement with what's his face, Cohen, his lawyer, and then of course made an enemy of Cohen. So then Cohen wants to go and testify against him. Then none of this would have happened. Hey, are the media making?
And if we also said that Joe Biden, when he was in Ukraine back in 2014, helping overthrow a democratically elected government to put a pro-Western government in place, putting his son in charge of the oil company and having money funneled from the oil company through his son into the Biden family. But is anyone prosecuting Joe Biden over this?
Well, they're prosecuting him in the media, and rightfully so. I think there's a lot of real I agree with you, Kevin. That's highly problematic. I don't know about the pushing a coup. There's lots of different opinions on that. What was the majority opinion of the average Ukrainian people and all that. But I will say the whole Burisma thing with Hunter Biden is horrible and a huge mistake on Joe Biden's part. I don't care how much you love your son. You don't put your son into a board where he's obviously just collecting money, and then you have this clear conflict of interest with this country that is very geopolitically important. Even back in 2014, there was a lot going on. It was a terrible.
My point is, why aren't they prosecuting Biden for this? The prosecution of Trump is solely to help Biden get reelected.
What law?
Well, they determined with President Biden that he is unprosecuted. He can't be prosecuted because the jury of his peers would view him as a sympathetic old man with mental health problems, i.e. dementia.
Absolutely.
So,
So who actually runs the U.S. government then? This democratically elected, non-dictatorship, government.
Well, it would be his advisors, I'm sure, make a lot of decisions for him. But I mean, the fact is, he didn't break a law by doing that. It was unethical. It was gross. It was dark money. He shouldn't have done it. But Trump broke the law, and it was a campaign law. So
funneling money from a Ukrainian oil company into the Biden family and Biden using it is a violation of the law.
That Joe Biden got any of that money. There's this whole the big man sort of thing. Joe Biden has released his tax returns every year. Where is that money that ended up in his bank account or a property in his name or something? Like, it certainly went to Hunter Biden. Hunter was on the board of Burisma, But where's the money that went to Joe Biden? Joe Biden's a lot more careful about that sort of thing than Trump is, and therefore
there's a million different ways to hide money. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, there's a lot of people looking for this. Where's the evidence? I mean, there's lots of conservative news out there that would be all over Fox News, it'd be all over Breitbart, it'd be all over Newsmax. Where is it?
You got to show receipts if you want to go to court and get a conviction.
Yeah.
Speaking of President Trump, it's his birthday today.
Yeah,
Is it
what?
today?
70 what? 76, 78, something like that.
Let's find out. We'll find out here. How old is President Trump?
He's a young man.
78th birthday. Good Lord. I thought he was younger.
Yep, 78
Well, it's great.
years
He had a
old.
really good meeting with I think yesterday. A lot of people showed support, so it's good. He's got plenty of backing. It's going to be a real contest. I mean, that debate is going to be it's going to be well watched.
Do you guys think it's going to happen?
When is the debate?
It's supposed to be June 27th, last I heard.
Yeah. A war of words there. And, you know, we have this war of words going on, and I'd like your thoughts on what Zelensky had to say in this interview, where he's calling Putin a Nazi. And, of course, we've heard a lot of allegations from the other side, from the Russian side, that Ukraine is full of Nazis. We want denazification. I don't even know what that exactly means or what that would look like. Did you guys see the comments that Zelensky made today in response to the Putin peace proposal? No?
Yeah, I did. I read it.
Well, here, I can bring it up since I don't think Carl had an opportunity to see it. So let me run it, and then I'll get you guys to comment on it. Everybody's a Nazi, it seems. Everybody's a Nazi.
Of course.
Let's see what he said.
Cosa posso dire?
Says, what can I say? These messages are an ultimatum.
Sono messaggi di ultimatum, non hanno nulla
They aren't any
di
different from the
diverso
ultimatums that he has given
che ha fatto
before.
anche prima, e noi stiamo
Now we are
realmente
seeing that what he's
vediamo
doing is the revival of
attualmente
Nazism.
che è una rinascita di nazismo quello che fa. È una nuova ondata
It's a new wave of Nazism,
di
Russian
questo
Nazism.
nazismo, perché è un nazismo russo. Tutto quello che
Putin
dichiara
wants us to give up
Putin,
part of our occupied
lui vuole che
territories.
noi ridiamo una parte dei nostri territori che è occupati, ma anche vuole quelli non occupati.
And also the ones
Stessa
that are
cosa
not
che faceva
occupied
Hitler,
yet. It's the same
quando
as
lui
when Hitler
diceva che
said,
datemi una parte
give
di
me a
Cecoslovacchia,
part of
finisce
Czechoslovakia
tutto qui,
and
ma
it will
no,
end here.
sono le bugie,
But
le
no,
bugie
it's a lie. It's a
storiche.
historical lie.
Dopodiché c'è stata la Polonia,
And then there was
datemi una parte
Poland and
della
the
Polonia,
occupation of the
dopodiché
whole
c'è stata
territory
l'occupazione
of
di
Europe.
tutta Europa, e voi, perché oggi
Today he's talking
parla
about
di
4
4
regions. Before it
regioni.
had been only
Prima
2,
parlava di
Crimea
Crimea e
and
Donbass,
Donbass.
perché io ritengo
I
che
believe that
questo
this
nazismo è già
Nazism has already
arrivato
come in the face
e
of Putin.
adesso ha questo volto di Putin. Cosa posso
Well, it comes down, I guess, to what is a Nazi?
Yeah. Well, I've told you this before, Rick. The whole Nazi thing is played very large and big by Russia as a justification. I know an awful lot of people in Ukraine, and I would say I know I'd say I know none that are actually Nazis, but are there some? Yeah. Are there some in the US? Yeah. Obviously, it's a Nazi country. Canada, yeah, obviously it's a Nazi country. Germany, obviously, if we took everywhere that, I don't know, we used to make these jokes here about, the Tatars that were, left Ukraine in 2014, and they'd get in front of TV and they'd have these big rallies. But if you actually saw what they were, is camera angles and everything, five guys with a television camera, and that's what this whole Nazi thing is 5 Nazis makes the whole country a Nazi country. So that's
Yeah,
pure
I agree. I think
propaganda
it's
on
very-
Russia's side.
I think it's dumb, and it's the same as when people throw around the word genocide for everything. It's a genocide here, it's a genocide there. You know,
Or
it cheapens
dictator.
a dictator. Yeah, I know. Dictator should only be used for when people really are dictators. It's very true.
Yeah, this is an absolute shame what we've done with these words like racism, words like Nazi. These things used to mean something. They don't mean anything anymore. They don't
Right.
mean anything at all.
Really sad.
And it makes me sick.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what he made the historical parallel with, you know, Czechoslovakia. I mean, appeasement didn't work in 1939; it won't work now. But the Nazi thing, I mean, I have a lot of nasty things to say about Vladimir Putin, right? But I'm not going to call him a Nazi. He's an avowed white supremacist. He doesn't have a national fascist system of instituting white and identifying a scapegoat minority to send into concentration camps en masse. I mean, it's ridiculous. So Zelensky shouldn't have used that term.
Well,
Oddly enough, the Oxford definition is a Nazi is a member of the far-right National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's it. That's the diction. So
that being said,
basically,
I have seen, though, pro-Palestinian demonstrators walking around with swastikas, which is something I never thought I would see in Canada, but I've seen it just in the past week here.
In Canada, not in Gaza?
In Canada.
Isn't there laws about that in Canada?
Oh, yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, there are. There are hate
here.
speech, hate laws, yeah, hate crimes.
Where's Joseph to defend that those aren't actually Nazi symbols? Call him up to come on, Rick.
Well, no. He was quite, Kevin, he was actually quite accurate in he was saying.
What was on those buildings was accurate.
Okay, no, it's the swastika has been used. It was used long before Nazi Germany used it. Hindus, it's many different cultures have used it. But that being said, I don't support the use of it. I understand what he was saying. I don't like even going down that path because it creates this pseudo justification for the use of it for political reasons, which is why, I don't even want to talk about it right now because I'm going to draw attention to people who are using it in an improper way, cloaking their true intentions in history. And abusing it and perverting it. So I don't even really want to talk about it that much. But no, Joseph was quite correct in the way that he asserted himself on that subject that night. So I have to say that I think you're being a little bit harsh, just a little bit.
Well, actually, I was being serious. You should call him and have him come on because he can actually defend that. So I wasn't being harsh. I actually support what he was saying. We can say the same thing about, all the claims of the right sector using the what is it, the Black Sun flag. Well, obviously they're Nazis, but that was from long before then as well.
Yeah. But he wasn't defending anybody using it. He was pointing out the historical uses in the past, which is that's all he was doing. He's saying in Detroit you could find swastikas on buildings. And he explained why. That's all he ever did. But anyway, we digress.
I think we agree, Rick.
I think so. Let's stop fighting about agreeing.
Fight. No, don't fight.
Yeah. The point is the Azov battalion to this day is called, a group of Nazis, and because of the flag they use, because of the symbols they use. And these are the same thing. They're symbols that were there long before they were ever used by Germany, the SS, guys like that. So
I'm actually really interested in your perspective on Azov, Kevin. I'm really interested. So we get approached. My group here in Seattle, we've raised over $500,000. We've sent a lot of night vision drones and vehicles and medical supplies and all that. And we occasionally get approached by members of Azov or 3rd Battalion. 3rd Assault Battalion is like a rebranded unit that has a lot of Azov personnel. And it doesn't have Azov in the title, but it still has their emblem. And their emblem Can you call up their emblem, Rick? You can just type in 3rd Assault Battalion, or you can type in Azov. It looks really, really swastika-ish. So,
Yeah.
and so far we don't support them, but I'm just curious, what's your opinion, Kevin? Like, are they legit or are they full of Nazis? Because I honestly don't know.
That's a hard one to say. If you listen to the Department of Defense, they've reformed. They say, they were, yeah. This is the black sun. Same thing that they have on the flag, other than a little different colors. So, they originated back as a
neo-Nazi group.
I even hate to use the term neo-Nazi group. They were, based on the OUN out of Western Ukraine. They were, definitely white supremacists. They were, they had all the markings of, like I said, I don't want to use the term, Nazi group, but, not a very nice bunch of guys. They've now been pulled in a year and a half ago under the National Guard.
Right.
And a lot of these guys have been pulled out. They're, not supposedly, if you listen to the US and how they've evaluated them under whatever that law is, they evaluate them on, no longer an organization that supports terror tactics. But, how much of that is actually changing their views over a period of 3 or 4 years, 6 years, 7 years, versus downplaying it and having talks with guys saying, look, you can't be so blatant about the things like this. I can't speak to this directly. I can speak to the fact that back before this conflict started in 2022, there were actually some of these guys going around and they would threaten or even beat civilians on the street for speaking Russian. Now, I still hear all the time over here that this still goes on. And, same thing as these are the same guys who are going out as the draft commissioners and beating guys on the streets and things. Do these things happen? Yes, they do. But I know an awful lot of Russian speakers in Ukraine. Now, do they speak Russian on the street? No. Do they speak Russian in their homes? Absolutely. So as far as Azov goes, I think they've tamed the rhetoric down considerably. Should they be getting weapons or not? I really don't see them at this point being much different than, the Wagner group.
Yeah, we just saw within days the ban lifted on giving weapons to the Azov battalion.
Yep.
Sorry, Carl, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say that's basically the conclusion we came to, which is that they have, understood that their reputation is hurting them, and therefore they're rebranding. And you can see that. I mean, they have this new unit called 3rd Assault Battalion. And I'm told that both Azov and 3rd Assault Battalion are some of the hardest fighting within Ukraine and have a lot of respect from the Ukrainian civilian and the military establishment. But we're going to keep them at arm's distance just because of that past association.
And I also have to weigh that against having been up in Mariupol as well. There's a lot of people who left Mariupol who have now come back that say they were mistreated or they were treated heavy-handed by this battalion. So I think they're making progress.
It's interesting that we're talking about this because this was really, I think, one of the flashpoints that got us to this point is this language issue and the law that was passed by the Ukrainian government saying that Ukrainian would be the only official language spoken in the country, and that's one of the things that was at the that really resulted in the conflict that we saw in these areas where you had these separatists
This
fighting,
this is
right?
something, and this is something that I hear often said. Well, the big conflict here is Ukraine passed this law that you couldn't use Russian. I've known my wife since the very early 2000s, and at that time they had laws where Ukrainian was the official language, and there is actually no law that says you can't speak Russian. Ukrainian is to be used in official documents. It's to be used in official communications. And this has been in place since 2002, 2003. My wife was required, even though she taught in the Russian language, she was required to do all documents, all report cards, all grades, everything in the Ukrainian language. It was a requirement. Back then, and this is just another sign of how, democracy was working for them at that time in the early 2000s, they actually had candidates who would come in and they were told who they would vote for. So they were told, if you want to keep your job, you will vote for this person. So
it's a patronage system. It's very common.
This stuff has been going on for a long time. This is nothing new.
So I'll agree with what Kevin said, and actually I saw it with my own eyes when I was a soldier in Ukraine. You drive. So I was stationed in eastern Ukraine in Kharkiv and along the Severodonetsk River east of Kharkiv, and that is 90% Russian speaking area, and even to the point where the villages that we were stationed in a little tiny village called Molodovai and Rubizhne and Stary Saltiv. Stary Saltiv is kind of famous. It means old sultan, and there's a lot of touristy stuff there. But anyway, in the villages, all the, I don't want to say affluent, all the middle class people, anybody with any money left. And the people who were left were the people who never got past high school. And a lot of them didn't speak Ukrainian. They just spoke Russian. And they had some unpleasant interactions with Ukrainian soldiers that I witnessed. And I used Google Translate afterwards to find out why the Ukrainian girl was crying, or why the Ukrainian grandpa had gotten screamed at or whatever. And it was like, oh, they don't like the fact that we don't speak Ukrainian, It's like, oh man. And then you drive down the towns and you'd see shops. Of course, it's a standard developing country, right? They don't really believe in sidewalks in those villages, right? It's just rows of shops, and you pull in space for pull your car over, and you'd see these blank spots. And one day I was going in, I was buying a cell phone cord or whatever, and I went in and I used Google Translate as I do. As I became a ninja using Google Translate. And I asked the gal, where's your sign? Somebody told me to look for the cell phone shop and I couldn't find it. You need a sign. And she's like, the government came and tore our sign off because it was in Russian. And I refused to spend the money to replace the sign because I'm so angry about this. So I'm not going to say that the Ukrainian government hasn't shot itself in the foot numerous times. I'm not going to say that. They've made a lot of mistakes, a lot of heavy-handed, really unfortunate decisions by that government. Does it give Russia an excuse to invade them? Of course not. But yeah, they make mistakes.
Could you guys imagine what would happen in Canada if we told Quebec that we were dropping French as a second language?
Yikes.
Don't you dare use it.
I'm going to get some more water. I'll be right back. I'm listening.
Yeah.
Any response to that, Kevin? What is do you see a legal justification for this special military operation or invasion, however someone wants to characterize it?
I even hate to comment without Carl being here. So
he said he was listening. I think he is here.
Okay. So language, is that the reason for the special military operation? Well, Not
I don't think
really.
that's the reason for the military
Yeah.
operation.
So Russian speakers, however, have historically been a group that Russia views as Russians, particularly when you're dealing with former Soviet states. A lot of Russians in North Ossetia, South Ossetia, a lot of Russians in Ukraine, a lot of Russians in Belarus, a lot of Russians in Armenia. And what we have to remember is that under the Soviet Union, people moved between these republics freely, much like, in Canada or the United States, people going from one region or another. Now, imagine being from Quebec as a French speaker, and, you go to, I don't know, let's pick Toronto, and all of a sudden the country breaks up, and Toronto is a different country than Quebec was in. Now, does that mean you're no longer I don't know, what would you call them, a Quebecan? You're now a Torontoite?
Quebecois. Quebecois.
Be careful, Sam. So
should
you
get a
do
choice,
have a lot of dogs falling down the stairs coming up to be with me. Obviously woke my wife up. So, you've got people who are displaced from their countries by this breakup. My wife's heritage is half Ukrainian, half Russian. So by the fact that she happened to be in Ukraine when the Soviet Union broke up, she became Ukrainian. That doesn't mean, her heritage is Ukrainian. Well, in her case it does, but, half Ukrainian. But a lot of people had this situation. Kharkiv was another big area. But, when you go to language, the current Kharkiv mayor went out a year and a half ago, and he was speaking in public in Russian, and he got harassed by the Ukrainian military. But he said, "We are Russian speakers." Well, he's still mayor. So, a lot of it comes down to Russia feeling the right to protect historic Russians. Do I see that as a justification? Not really. They have programs for former Russian citizens, to be able to immigrate back to Russia. It's supposed to be easy, but actually our experience here is they have a much harder time, returning to Russia than, foreigners like I do have, coming here. I think the real big thing behind it was the security blanket of Ukraine not becoming part of NATO. And even though they weren't talking about Ukraine necessarily becoming a part of NATO, they were already having, Western NATO training grounds there. There were NATO bases being built there. So I think that Russia saw that as a real threat to their sovereignty. A lot of it being the influence over Ukraine as well. Dnipropetrovsk, where my wife is from, they had the factory that built half of the engines for space launches. Well, when they went with the West, they no longer cooperated with Russia on those engines. So Russia took the technology, built a new factory. They do the whole thing in Russia now. And what happened to this factory? It became a cat and dog collar factory. My wife has friends who worked there. And now, as specialists, they make pet stuff. And, so I don't know. There's a lot of things going on where, it's a complex situation, and, it's multifaceted. Russia really saw it as a security thing, kind of like Russia sending their, nuclear submarine and their, battleship to Cuba the other day. What is that? Nothing but a message to the United States of, well, we can do the same thing. So,
of course, and I agree that the language issue, we Americans and Canadians make more of it than it really was. I know, I would say a good half of the Ukrainians in my group, the over 200 Ukrainians in my group, speak Russian natively, and their Ukrainian is kind of halting a lot of the time. But yeah, NATO was more of more of a concern to Putin than the language. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. Like if you have sovereignty over any country where it has citizens who speak your language, then England would have sovereignty over the United States and most of Canada, or in France would have sovereignty over Quebec. I mean, it's ludicrous. But the NATO thing, I mean, Putin has some legitimate concerns there, and like I said, I mean, if Ukraine gets its land back and has some security guarantees, then I would not. It's not my call, but I would not be averse to some sort of a deal where they don't join NATO. I mean, I think that's kind of a good off ramp to offer Putin. Part of it, there would have to be more compromises. Like I say, there would need to be some sort of arrangement for Crimea specifically.
Yeah, Carl, definitely there's got to be compromises on both sides if anything's going to happen.
The Reader's Digest version, Putin, it's always been the NATO question that presented this existential threat to Russia. Putin couldn't have it. I totally understand that perspective, but he couldn't send in tanks on that issue. Legally, he needed some legal justification. That's where the language issue comes in. He points to Ukraine attacking its own people without, I think, people here in the West fully understanding that that really is an internal conflict predicated on the language issue and other issues that resulted in really a separatist movement that I think was supported by mercenaries and Russia to some degree in those Russian-speaking areas. And that's what formed, after a period of time where it was just went on for a period of time, that's where Putin found the legal justification to launch a special military operation. Is that a fair assessment?
yeah, I mean, the whole accepting Lugansk and Donetsk as independent republics. They had already declared they were back in, 2014, but recognizing them gave them, this is kind of like the election thing we were talking about a little while ago. It gave Russia the legal ability to go in because they were invited by independent republics that they recognized. Now, is this all hocus pocus playing with laws and things? Absolutely. But Ukraine was attacking those regions. Those people were separatists. A lot of them looked at Crimea and said, well, gee, why did Crimea get to, hop over to the Russian side so easily and we don't? And Ukraine was pretty brutal with those people. Lots of children killed, lots of civilians. To this day, a lot of shelling going on deep into the territories where the military is not there. So, maybe with those two regions, they had a little more justification. When you start talking about Kharkiv, Zaporozhia, Kherson, I would say less so, but now they're playing on the Russian language thing. They're Russian speakers. They're historically Russian. They've been talking about Odessa being a Russian city for the last 2.5 years. But notice that in this peace proposal, they don't even mention it. They're willing to say, that's not so important to us now. So a lot of this political wrangling going on all sides.
I think that's the most honest and best assessment we've had, but with you guys both contributing to this conversation that I've heard anywhere so far, honestly. no matter where I look, I see such polarized opinions on this and so much propaganda. I think this is a clearer view of the true um, the, the true story that has led up to the point we're at today.
Well, we have the same things going on like in Georgia and Armenia right now. Why is the West so against Georgia passing these foreign agent laws? They're the same laws that exist in the United States. I don't know if Canada has this foreign agent law where if you get, a certain amount of your funding, you have to register as a foreign agent, but they do not want Georgia to do this. Well, why is that? Because there's a lot of Western US-backed NGOs there. Now you have the Georgian government saying, yes, let's do it. Yet you have the people saying no. And now all of a sudden they have this big conflict going on over there. They have politicians switching sides. They've now restored their relations with Russia. They're reopening their embassy in Moscow. So, it's the same political games. It comes down to who has power and who has control. The United States, since the fall of the Soviet Union, has been the big boy on the block. Russia and China have, want to hold those positions as well. So you have three bullies who are trying to be the biggest bully on the block.
It's political realism.
Influence.
That's political realism.
The effects of Russia to the United States, I'm just not going to agree with that. The United States certainly makes mistakes. Look at our forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, certainly. But I would argue that the United States overall is very much a force for good in the world in the post-Soviet and post-Cold War environment. I mean, we are by de facto the world's policeman. And do we make mistakes? Certainly we do. But by and far, I'd say we're a voice for positive democracy versus Russia.
But you say the United States is the world's policeman. Like, you should be proud of that. What gives them the right to be the policeman of the world?
I'd be happy to hand that off to the UN, but the world has decided not to have the UN have a military force, mainly because the UN is very dysfunctional and was kind of set up as an old boys club with the Security Council the way it is, and so it's not really very effective. So the U.S. by default ends up being the one that goes into Libya, that goes in and to Syria, that goes in and tries to do the right thing, and we make mistakes certainly. And there's political infighting, and don't get me started on Israel Palestine. Oh my God, that's a ball of wax there. There's a lot of different opinions there, and a lot of people criticize American foreign policy. But overall, I would say we do a lot of good. Look at Taiwan and China. If the United States, if the Seventh Fleet was not in the South Chinese Sea, Taiwan would probably have been invaded already. I mean, South Korea would almost certainly have been invaded by North Korea. There would be there would be numerous more wars all around the world, I think.
I'd say in the 90s, the early 2000s, I would say you're correct. The United States should have been and was the world's policeman. In this day and age, they really need to step back from that. This is a different world. They are not the guys who really are in the position to say, this is the way you need to run your government when they don't follow their own rules-based order. And this is what you hear in other countries often is, who is the United States to keep crying, the rules-based order when they don't follow the rules?
I have a kind of an answer to that, just through observation. I really do agree with Carl when he says that I think overall the United States is a force for good. And Kevin, I don't know that the United States can stay out of things because the world demands that the United States get involved every time there's some problem, some war, some conflict. The whole world looks to the United States and says, well, what are you going to do about it? That's every single time. And then as soon as they get involved, they say, well, you shouldn't have done that, you big bully. right? So
think
they're
that-
damned if
I
you
think
do,
that
damned
hit-
if you don't.
That hits it right on the nail, like the nail right on the head right there, Rick. That's
Yeah,
100%
no,
correct.
Carl didn't want to get into Israel and Gaza, but you have the same thing there. You have the Palestinians demanding the U.S. get involved on their side, Israel on their side, and they're damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Very
But
true.
it makes the United and I'm not saying the United States doesn't do a lot of good in the world. They do. But you know, the United States seems to have gone to this trying to play both sides of the fence thing now. Well, we're going to supply aid to the Palestinians, but we're going to supply weapons to Israel, and uh, you know, eh, it seems like their influence is getting less.
I think that's because the
true.
political realities, even on the home front, are different, and that's because of immigration, changing demographics. You're
Yep.
in an election year. You have Biden trying to pander to, a
His left
Muslim
wing.
voting base up in
Everybody.
places like Dearborn. He's looking at that. That's having as much impact on the U.S. policy in Gaza as what's going on in Gaza. So this is why it gets so complicated, and people can't figure out what the heck is going on, and why are they acting like this, and why are they playing both sides off? That's why. It's politics.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you get down to the people, we all want the same thing. We want better lives for our children. We want to be left alone, live our lives in peace. Unfortunately, we have governments getting in the way.
Amen to
And
that,
human
Kevin.
nature.
Amen to that. And I really feel like with the turmoil in the world right now, like especially for Canada, Canada really needs to fix its broken house right now. And like with my position, I feel like people my age here are really economically depressed. And it's incredibly sad. Like there's no opportunity here. And it's like it's creating even more dysfunction in the country. Like we need to fix our country, and when we fix the individual will build things, and when the individual builds things, it's gonna make it better.
If there's no opportunity, then people are going to naturally be really upset, and it's going to cause enormous divisions in society. I've seen that here. I'm a tech worker. I make good money, but I got a lot of friends who are young families. They can't afford. They're renting, and they can barely afford their rent, let alone to buy a house. And it's just really it's unfair, is what it is.
It is unfair. And then we have the military-industrial complex that's getting involved in all this stuff, and it's like
And making billions.
People see all that money going to Ukraine, and they're like, "Wait, that's unfair. We should keep that money here." I mean, I don't blame people for feeling that way. It's a natural way to feel. My answer to that would be that we should have a stronger safety net, and that we should, frankly, we should have set up incentives here in Seattle, where I live here, to have affordable housing for young families. We should. I mean, the zoning here is set up to favor old rich people, not rich, but like upper middle class people who bought their houses in the 80s for $100,000, and now their house is worth $1 million. And they don't want anybody else building any apartments around them or any condos, and they want single family. And it's just it means that young families have to commute an hour and a half to get into the city. It's even worse up in Vancouver, BC. Vancouver, BC is a poster case. It's terrible. It's insane. And then you got all these Chinese people coming over and buying houses. When I was going to buy this house, several of the other houses, there was a gal, a Chinese dealer, walking around, a real estate dealer with a phone, giving a tour to her. Oh shoot, did we lose Rick?
I'm sure he'll be back.
I'm sure we'll be back. Anyway, she was speaking in Mandarin too, and we asked, and they were in mainland China. They were going to buy the house and leave it empty. And we were competing against that, which is my wife and I.
That's a major problem in Canada right now. There's a lot of foreign people that are buying homes and then putting them back on the market. And it's like the rent in where I live is like, if you want a 3-bedroom home for rent here, is like $3,000 a month plus utilities. That's insane. In 2010, I rented a small 1-bedroom cottage for like $600. a month. A
Yeah,
cottage.
I mean, when I was young, I rented a whole house for $800. That wasn't that long ago, actually. That was like 12 years ago. So I
That's what.
mean, yeah, it sucks. It's the tech industry, and then it's zoning, and it's NIMBYism, and it's a bunch of people running cities that shouldn't be running cities. I mean, it's a bunch of Democrat-run cities, honestly, that are unlivable. I got so many friends who are moving out of Seattle, San Fran, Portland, and they're moving to Texas and Idaho and Arizona, because Democrats destroy cities. It's terrible.
That's a good question for Kevin. I want to hear what the average rent for like a 2-bedroom home where you were at.
Depress me.
Well, we rent a 2-bedroom apartment out to other people here for $300 a month, 300 US equivalent. So Moscow, I have a friend up there who rents a one bedroom. They call it a 2-room apartment, but it's a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a living room for 30,000 ruble. So again, about $300 a month.
Wow, that's great for Moscow. Hey, I really apologize, guys. I have another call starting in a minute. I apologize. I'm going to have to drop off. I hope that's okay, Rick.
Yes, absolutely.
This has been really enjoyable. I appreciate both Brendan and Kevin. I appreciate you guys' perspectives. I'm looking forward to joining future calls. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you, Carl.
Glad to meet you in person for a change.
Yeah,
or face to face.
Face to face. Hopefully in person at some point. We'll see.
Yep.
And we'll have to figure out a third country, maybe Turkey or something. All right. Cheers.
Armenia.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was a great, and I didn't know if he was going to be joining us here tonight, so I'm glad that he was able to, and I didn't mean to spring that on you guys tonight unexpectedly, but that was a bonus to have Carl join us this evening. So, Kevin, do you think that there is a path forward to peace actually being presented here, or is this all false hope?
I think this is the same peace plan that Putin has been putting forth over and over the last couple of years. Reality is under the current situation, and I'll talk a little more freely about this without Carl here, only because I didn't want to cause the argument. Russia is making advances in Ukraine. The Ukrainian economy has already failed. If it wasn't for these loans and grants and other money being given to them, their economy would have already been out. They have very little electricity capacity at this point. They're running on like 40 to 45% of their normal electric. So people are having 3-4 hours a day of electricity. Things are very dire for Ukraine at the moment. And if it wasn't for the monetary support from the West, and they really wouldn't be doing well. They're losing a lot more than 1 guy to 3 Russians. It is honestly running 7-8 Ukrainians per man. We're seeing here captured soldiers in their 60s and 70s from the Ukrainian side. They're taking older and older men. They're taking more women now. And the weapons that are being promised even the money is being promised over 3 to 4 year periods. Weapons to be delivered in 2026, 2027. They won't do any good by then. Could Russia carry this on this long? They could, as long as Ukraine has something to fight with, but they really aren't in a good situation right now. Would Putin walk away with the 4 regions that they've taken under the Russian Federation? I think he would. I think he would settle for that. Will he compromise on those 4 regions? Absolutely not. Legally,
There,
He
there, there-
can't.
there's another aspect to this that we haven't even touched on, and that's NATO countries with troops positioned, maybe getting ready to go in as well. I'm hearing a lot of talk about that over here. I'm seeing, I don't know how real that is or how much of it's propaganda. I will say this, though, I'm going to stick to my position, and I see this as still more of a stalemate with Russia making some recent gains because of the delays and the support that we just experienced. And, it's we're seeing the effects of that largely right now. Uh, so yeah, I mean that's kind of the way I'm seeing it. But you're there on the ground, Kevin, so I defer to
Yeah,
you.
the stalemate that we're talking about
Mhm.
really is with a heavy lean towards Russia. Um, if NATO can provide weapons, then things probably would stop in Russia advancing. But, their anti-aircraft systems, as much as Carl likes to think that they've got a bunch of them, Russia is dropping missiles and bombs on them. They aren't just firing from Russian territory, they're firing from planes over Ukraine. We actually have the ability from actually Western European sites to track the missile launches and planes going in to Ukraine. So, um, if they get more weapons, they can probably hold Russia better than they are right now. Um, do I think NATO is going to go in? I don't think so, because Putin has made it very clear that threatening Russia will cause a nuclear war. Now, he's saying he won't be the first one to use them, but if you threaten Russia's sovereignty, they could use non tactical weapons. They could use tactical weapons. I don't know. That still concerns me. So I think we still have that mutual destruction thing that
Mhm.
holds NATO from going into an all out war.
Well, that's what
And
yeah, I mean, we've discussed that on the show before, even in the early days when we had other people on the program talking about this. If Russia gets backed into a corner, they don't have the conventional depth to withstand an all-out NATO assault, in my view. So they would be relying on that nuclear deterrent so that they don't have
we
to
have
fight a
so
war like
many,
that.
yeah, we have so many Western European countries who can't provide what they've promised to Ukraine already because they've depleted their own supplies and they don't feel they can defend themselves at this point. So, you know, can they defend against an attack from Russia? Maybe. Can they go out on the offensive against Russia? I seriously doubt it. Because I think at the point where you have NATO going into Ukraine and going up against Russia, they're also going to end up going up against China.
Well, that's true. It'll spread like wildfire
Yeah, well,
if, yeah,
they have now signed
any
mutual
conflict. Yeah.
security agreements with each other.
Hmm.
So,
Well, let's pray that that doesn't happen, and let's hope that what we're seeing happen over the weekend, that it leads to peace.
yeah,
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, we have two sides that are like two cats in a burlap sack, and they're more stubborn than a mule. So I'm not very optimistic, unfortunately, but I'm
and
interested to see what's going to happen if there's going to be a change in this 10-point peace plan, and if there's going to be any concessions. But I really think that the two of them need to start talking about something, anything. There needs to be dialogue, and there hasn't been dialogue. Nothing's going to happen until they sit down. They need to sit down.
yeah.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, Brendan, are you coming back tomorrow night?
Yeah, I'll come back
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Okay, so that's cool. So I'll tell you what, we were going to talk about foreign interference and stuff, but let's save all that for tomorrow. We'll wrap things up here. I think this has been a great conversation. It's filled up 2 hours tonight, and I'm really grateful for Carl having joined us, and for you too, Kevin, to spend time here because I know that it's very, very late or early, depending on how you look at it, over in your part of the world. So with that, I'll just throw it to you guys for just a quick wrap up, and then we'll sign off tonight.
I just wanted to say thank you, Kevin, for joining us tonight, and as well as Mr. Larson, Carl there. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you guys. I'm very glad to have been a part of everything that we did here tonight, and sayonara, everybody out there in the Maverick family. It's great to be back. I will be seeing you tomorrow night.
Okay. Kevin, thank you.
Cool. No, it was a good show. You know, glad Carl could make it, and you know, good to see him face to face for a change. But you know, Brendan, glad to see you, and Rick, always a pleasure to be with you. Glad to add my insights.
All right, gentlemen, we will do this again, and we'll be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, everybody. And we have another special show lined up for you tomorrow night. You're not going to want to miss it. I believe Ed Dixon is going to be here to talk about those Ukrainian orphans. And we'll have the other top news stories of the day tomorrow on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.